All stories are dramatized recreations. Named locations are fictionalized. Any resemblance to real persons is coincidental.
Amelia, barista. The smell of charcoal and seared meat should have been comforting. It was the smell of summer, of lazy Saturdays, of family. But today, it smelled like lies. The laughter around me was a dissonant soundtrack to the silent movie playing in my head, a film reel of the last 5 minutes that had shattered 12 years of my life. My fingers were still buzzing from the touch of his phone, or rather from his reaction to my touch. It was a simple, wifely gesture. Christopher was manning the grill, flipping burgers with one hand, holding his phone in the other, a conductor of our perfect suburban symphony. Our daughter, Lily, was chasing lightning bugs with her cousins on the lawn, her giggles cutting through the twilight. I was carrying a tray of potato salad to the picnic table, my arms sticky from the humidity and spilled lemonade. As I passed him, I saw a bead of sweat trickle down his temple. My Christopher, my husband of 12 years, I reached out, a familiar, casual move to brush it away with my thumb. He didn't see my hand coming. His eyes were glued to his phone screen, a small, private smile playing on his lips. A smile I hadn't seen directed at me in months. When my thumb made contact with his skin, he flinched. It wasn't a subtle shift. It was a full-body jolt, a violent recoil as if I'd branded him. His phone, the source of that secret smile, slipped from his grasp and clattered onto the flagstone patio. "Jesus, Amelia," he snapped, his voice a sharp crack that silenced the laughter nearby. His eyes were wide, not with surprise, but with panic. He scrambled for the phone, snatching it up and clutching it to his chest like a precious relic. The screen went dark as he fumbled with it. The world narrowed to that single point. The phone pressed against his grass-stained, kiss the chef apron, an apron I'd bought him as a joke for our anniversary. The irony was a physical blow. I was just wiping your sweat," I said, my voice small and foreign to my own ears. The tray of potato salad felt like a ton of lead. "I'm fine," he barked, his tone defensive, his eyes darting everywhere but mine. "Just don't sneak up on me like that." Sneak up on him? I had walked across our own backyard in plain sight. The air, once thick with the warmth of family, was now frozen. My sister-in-law gave me a questioning look. My brother cleared his throat and loudly asked about the burgers, but I was rooted to the spot, watching my husband. His knuckles were white where he gripped the phone. He was breathing heavily, as if he'd just run a mile. This was more than just being startled. This was the gut-deep, primal reaction of a man with something to hide. A man who had been caught in a universe of a moment, a universe where I was the intruder. And in that frozen instant, the cracks that I had been meticulously plastering over for months yawned wide open into a chasm. The late nights at work. "A big deployment," he'd said, a software engineer whose projects had suddenly become all-consuming. The new cologne, just trying something different. The emotional distance I'd chalked up to stress. The way he'd started criticizing my lack of ambition, comparing my quiet contentment as a barista, a manager of a small coffee shop, to his high-stakes tech world. "You're just making coffee, Amelia. I'm building systems that change the world." The words had stung, but I'd swallowed them, believing it was his stress talking. Now, standing in the eerie silence he had created, I saw it all for what it was. Not stress, not a midlife crisis. It was the classic, cliché script of a man rewriting his life, and I was a character he was trying to edit out. He finally risked a glance at me, his expression a messy palette of guilt, anger, and fear. He tried to soften it to force a smile. "Sorry, honey, you just startled me. The grill is really hot." It was a lie, a pathetic, transparent lie. The grill was hot, but his panic was ice cold. I didn't respond. I just turned and walked back towards the house, the tray still in my hands. I heard him call my name, a strained, desperate sound, but I didn't stop. I walked through the sliding glass door, into the cool, air-conditioned kitchen, and placed the potato salad on the counter with a terrifying calm. The house was quiet. From the window, I could see the tableau of my former life. Christopher, now pretending to laugh at something my brother said, the sound not reaching his eyes. Lily, innocent and beautiful, her small form darting through the gathering dusk. The family, oblivious, their world still intact. Mine had just been vaporized. My eyes fell on my own phone, charging on the kitchen counter. And then I remembered something from a few weeks ago. Christopher, complaining that his iPhone's battery was dying too quickly, had asked to borrow my old iPad to read on. I'd handed it over, thinking nothing of it. It was synced to my Apple ID. If he got messages on his phone and his Apple ID was logged in on that device, would they show up on the iPad? A cold, clear certainty washed over me. This wasn't a suspicion anymore. It was a hunt. I walked upstairs to our bedroom, my heart hammering against my ribs. The iPad was on his nightstand. I picked it up. The screen lit up, asking for a passcode. I never used a passcode on it. He had put one on. He had password-protected my own device. Driven by a force I didn't recognize, I typed in his standard passcode, the one he used for everything, Lily's birthday. The screen unlocked. My hands were shaking. I opened the Messages app. There at the top was a thread, not with his name, just a heart emoji. Read, I tapped it. The world fell away, the messages loaded. They weren't explicit. They were worse. They were intimate. They were the conversations of two people who shared a history, a secret world. Him, remember that dive bar in Boulder, the one with the terrible jukebox? Red, how could I forget? That's where you told me you were going to marry me. Him, I was an idiot, I should have. Red, you're not an idiot, you're just stuck. We'll figure this out. Him, it's killing me. Every day with her feels like a performance. Red, just hold on, our time is coming. Soon, this will all be a memory. I scrolled up. Photos. A selfie of them together, his face relaxed and happy in a way I hadn't seen in years. Her face, I knew her. Sarah, his college girlfriend, the one he'd always referred to as a chapter that closed. She lived in Denver now. The most recent message was from today, just an hour ago. Red, at the family barbecue, thinking of you, wishing I was there. Him, don't. It's torture. She's just here, you're all I can think about. The iPad slipped from my numb fingers and landed softly on the bed. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I felt empty, hollowed out. The performance, that's what I was. A supporting actor in the tragedy of my own life. I walked to the bathroom and looked in the mirror. Amelia, the barista, Amelia, the wife, Amelia, the mother. The woman looking back at me had eyes I didn't recognize. They were flat, dead. The face was pale, the features arranged in a mask of placid acceptance that had just been brutally torn off. The sound of the sliding door opening downstairs jolted me back. Amelia, Christopher's voice called, laced with a fake conciliatory cheer. The burgers are ready, come on out. I heard his footsteps on the stairs. He was coming to retrieve me, to smooth things over, to get back to his performance. I looked at my reflection one last time. The woman in the mirror was gone. Someone else was standing there. Someone with nothing left to lose. He pushed the bedroom door open. Honey, I'm really sorry about before. He stopped when he saw me. Saw the iPad lying on the bed, the screen still illuminated with his betrayal. Saw the expression on my face that was no longer hurt, but something far more dangerous. Absolute, cold clarity. The family barbecue. The moment I discovered the affair. It wasn't when I read the messages. It was right now, watching the color drain from his face, watching the carefully constructed facade of our life crumble to dust around him. Amelia, he whispered, his voice cracking, I can explain. But there was nothing to explain. The hook was set, and the line was about to be pulled. The silence in the house after the barbecue was a physical entity, thick and suffocating. It was louder than any argument could ever be. Christopher had tried to talk, his words a frantic, scrambling mess of excuses and pleas that bounced off the new, icy version of me that had formed in that bathroom mirror. I had simply held up a hand, my voice eerily calm. Not now, not in front of Lily. That had been the only rule, the one law that held the crumbling continent of our marriage together for one more night. The performance had to go on for our daughter. We had smiled as we said goodbye to our family. We had acted like a team as we bundled a sleepy Lily into the car. We had moved through the house like ghosts, avoiding each other, the weight of the unsaid pressing down on us until I thought the roof might cave in. I slept in Lily's room that night, curled up in her tiny bed beside her, watching the steady rise and fall of her chest, breathing in her sweet, childlike scent. It was the only thing that kept me from screaming. Each breath she took was a reason to hold myself together, even as my insides were ground to dust. Christopher didn't try to stop me. He knew. The evidence was irrefutable. The iPad was my Excalibur, and I had plunged it straight into the heart of our life together. The next morning, I moved with a robotic determination. I called my boss at the coffee shop, my voice surprisingly steady as I lied about a sudden, violent stomach bug. I got Lily ready for school, brushing her hair, packing her lunch, all while feeling Christopher's gaze on me, a silent, desperate plea. I said nothing. Words were currency I was no longer willing to spend on him. After I dropped Lily off, the silence in the car was deafening. I drove home, parked in the driveway, and sat there for a long time, staring at the house that was no longer a home. It was a crime scene. Every flower bed we'd planted together, every shingle we'd chosen, was now just a piece of evidence in the case against him. When I walked inside, he was waiting for me in the living room, looking haggard and ancient. He'd probably not slept a wink. "Amelia, please," he began, his voice raw. "Let me explain, it's not what you think." I didn't sit down. I stood in the doorway, a stranger in my own home. "What is it then, Christopher? Enlighten me. Is it not a long-term affair with your ex-girlfriend? Did you not tell her that being with me is a performance that's killing you?" I recited his words back to him, each one landing like a slap. He flinched. It was a mistake, a moment of weakness. I was feeling lost, and she was familiar. It didn't mean anything. The cliché of it was almost laughable. 12 years, Christopher, a child, a life. And you throw it all away for something that didn't mean anything? My calm was beginning to crack, a hot, sharp anger seeping through the fissures. "You made me a joke. You made our marriage a placeholder until something better came along." "That's not true," he insisted, rising to his feet. "I love you, I love Lily. This thing with Sarah, it's over. I ended it last night." "Last night?" I let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "How convenient. After you got caught. That's not ending it. That's damage control. Do you think I'm an idiot? Do you think I'll just, what, forgive and forget? Go back to making your coffee and folding your socks while you fantasize about a life that doesn't include me?" He looked defeated. "What do you want me to do, Amelia? What can I do to fix this?" And that was the million-dollar question. But the answer wasn't about him. It was about me. What did I need to do? The feeling of powerlessness was the most corrosive part. He had held all the power, the secret knowledge that could destroy my world, and he had wielded it with careless arrogance. My eyes traveled around the room, over the framed photos of our happy family, our vacations, our milestones. They were all lies now. My gaze then fell on a particular photo from our wedding day. I was looking at the camera, my eyes shining with absolute, unshakable faith in the man standing beside me. I looked so young, so naive, so unrecognizable. I walked over to the mantelpiece and picked up the frame. I studied the face of that young woman, the barista who had fallen in love with the ambitious software engineer, who had believed that love was enough to build a fortress against the world. "What am I going to do?" I repeated, softly, more to the photo than to him. Then, I turned and hurled the frame against the brick fireplace. The glass exploded with a terrifying, satisfying crash. Shards skittered across the hardwood floor. Christopher jumped back, stunned. "That's what I'm going to do," I said, my voice trembling with a fury that was finally, gloriously, breaking free. "I'm going to break everything. Starting with this." I didn't rage through the house, destroying everything in my path. That would come later in a more controlled way. This was a symbolic act, the first fracture, but it wasn't enough. The anger was a fire in my veins, and it needed an outlet, a transformation. The ghost of the woman in that photo needed to be exorcised. I walked past him into the kitchen and grabbed my car keys. "I'm going out." "Where?" "Amelia, we need to talk about this," he called after me, his voice rising in panic. "We're done talking," I said, and slammed the front door behind me. I drove aimlessly for a while, the adrenaline slowly ebbing, leaving a hollow, aching exhaustion. I couldn't go back to that house. Not yet. I found myself pulling into the parking lot of a strip mall, my eyes landing on a sleek, modern salon with a name like Sheer Revolution. It was the kind of place I never went to. My hair was cut by a nice woman named Debbie at a budget-friendly chain, always the same, shoulder-length, honey blonde highlights. Safe, easy, wifely. Without a second thought, I walked in. The air smelled of chemicals and ambition. A young woman with a razor-sharp black bob and a tattoo of a geometric wolf on her forearm greeted me. "Help you?" I looked at my reflection in the wall of mirrors. I saw the tired, betrayed wife, the barista, the mother, the woman who was just there. I want it all off, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. And I want a color, something different. The stylist, whose name was Zoe, looked me up and down, not with judgment, but with a spark of professional interest. Okay, talk to me, different how? I took a deep breath. I don't know, not blonde, something that isn't me. Zoe smiled, a slow, understanding smile. I get it, a reset. Let's do it. For the next 3 hours, I sat in that chair and surrendered. I watched as she sectioned my hair, as the scissors snipped away years of my life. Long, honey blonde strands fell to the floor, piling up around the chair like discarded memories. With each cut, I felt a little lighter, a little less like the woman Christopher had betrayed. The weight of it was literally being sheared away. Then came the color. A deep, vibrant, almost violent shade of crimson red. It wasn't a subtle change. It was a declaration of war on my old self, on my old life. As the die set, I stared at the stranger in the mirror. My face, stripped of its familiar frame, looked sharper, my eyes bigger, greener. There was a flicker of something else in them now, beneath the pain, a hint of defiance. When Zoe was finally done, she spun the chair around. I barely recognized the woman looking back at me. The hair was a short, sharp, chin-length bob, angled to frame my jawline. The red was shocking, electric. It wasn't pretty, it was powerful. Well, Zoe asked, grinning. I touched the ends of my hair, feeling the strange, sleek texture. A slow smile spread across my face, the first genuine one in what felt like a lifetime. It's perfect. When I walked out of the salon, I felt like I was wearing a suit of armor. The afternoon sun caught the red in my hair, and I felt seen in a way I hadn't in years. Not as Christopher's wife or Lily's mom, but as Amelia. A new Amelia. I drove back to the house, my heart pounding not with dread, but with a strange, nervous energy. Christopher was in the living room, nervously pacing. He heard the door open and turned, a prepared expression of contrition on his face. It vanished, replaced by pure, unadulterated shock. His jaw literally dropped. He stared at me as if I were an intruder. "Amelia, you're your hair," he stammered. I walked past him, not breaking my stride, heading for the stairs. "I told you," I said, my voice cool and steady. "I'm breaking everything." That night, after Lily was in bed, after her own shocked, then delighted, reaction to Mommy's cool new fire hair, the real conversation began. It was less a conversation and more a negotiation of surrender. I laid out my terms with a clarity that surprised even me. He would sleep in the guest room. We would tell Lily we were going through a rough patch, but that we both loved her very much. We would see a therapist, but only to navigate the separation with minimal damage to our daughter. There was no discussion of reconciliation. In my mind, it was over. The woman with the red hair had drawn a line in the sand, and she was not stepping back over it. As I lay in my own bed, alone for the first time in 12 years, I felt the enormity of it all crash down on me. The grief was a tidal wave, and I finally let it wash over me, sobbing silently into my pillow so Lily wouldn't hear. But amidst the agony, there was a tiny, stubborn ember. The ember of the woman who had walked into a salon and chosen to become someone new. The shattering was complete. Now, I had to figure out how to gather the pieces and what to build with them. The silence in the house took on new dimensions after the haircut. It was no longer just the absence of sound, it was a territorial entity. My silence, which was one of grim determination and simmering grief, occupied the master bedroom, the kitchen in the early mornings, and the driver's seat of my car. Christopher's silence, a guilty, shuffling thing, was confined to the guest room and the periphery of our lives. We orbited each other like dead stars, our gravitational pull only active when Lily was in the room. For her, we manufactured a brittle facsimile of normalcy. We ate dinner together, asked about her school day, and read bedtime stories in a duet that was the most painful performance of all. Therapy was a farce. Dr. Evans, a woman with a kind face and a notebook that saw right through us, tried to bridge the chasm. Christopher used the sessions as a stage for his repentance, his voice dripping with a remorse that felt like a well-rehearsed monologue. "I made a terrible mistake," he'd say, his eyes pleading with me. "I lost my way. I want to fix this, Amelia. I want to rebuild the trust." I would sit there, my crimson hair a stark flag of rebellion in the neutral-toned office, and say nothing. What was there to say? Rebuild trust? You can't rebuild on a foundation that has been deliberately vaporized. Dr. Evans would gently turn to me. Amelia, how does it feel when Christopher says that? I remember looking out the window at a pigeon, stubbornly trying to build a nest on a narrow ledge. It feels like he's trying to put a bandage on a severed limb, I said flatly. The limb is gone. The body has already gone into shock. The bandage is irrelevant. Christopher flinched. Dr. Evans nodded, making a note. There were no breakthroughs. There was only the meticulous mapping of a disaster zone. The only place I felt any semblance of peace was at work. The coffee shop, the daily grind, was my sanctuary. The hiss of the espresso machine, the rhythmic tamping of grounds, the familiar orders. These were rituals that required no emotional investment. My coworkers, especially a bubbly young woman named Chloe, had greeted my new hair with wide-eyed admiration. "Yas, Queen, you look like you're about to start a punk band," she'd exclaimed. I didn't correct her. Let them think it was a style choice. The truth was too heavy to bring into this place of light and caffeine. But the shop couldn't protect me from the hollows. The hollows were the moments of quiet that threatened to swallow me whole. The hollow after I dropped Lily off at school, when the car was too quiet. The hollow in the aisle of the grocery store, staring at his favorite brand of cereal I no longer needed to buy. The hollow in the middle of the night, when the space next to me in bed was a cold, empty continent. It was during one of these hollows, a rainy Tuesday afternoon, that I found myself driving past a small, nondescript music store I'd never noticed before, Melody Mart. On a whim, I pulled over. The bell above the door jingled, announcing my entrance to a world of polished wood and silent potential. The air smelled of lemon polish and old paper. An elderly man with a kind, wrinkled face looked up from behind a counter covered in sheet music. "Can I help you, dear?" I don't know," I said, my voice echoing slightly in the quiet space. My eyes fell upon a beautiful, digital keyboard on display. It was sleek and black, with keys that looked like they were waiting for a story to be told. The promise of it, the possibility of creating sound instead of dwelling in silence, was irresistibly compelling. "I think I'd like to learn to play," I heard myself say. The idea, once a random parameter in a list, now felt like a lifeline. The man's name was Mr. Henderson. He didn't ask questions. He simply nodded, as if people walked in off the street every day declaring their intention to become musicians. He showed me a beginner-friendly model, talked me through the basics, and sold me a book called Adult Piano for Beginners. I left the store with the keyboard in a large box, feeling a flicker of something that wasn't pain or anger. It was anticipation. Setting it up in the living room felt like an act of rebellion. I placed it where Christopher's favorite armchair used to be, a chair I'd promptly sold online one afternoon in a fit of pique. He'd come home and stared at the empty space, but had said nothing. The keyboard was my flag planted on that newly liberated territory. The first few sessions were comically frustrating. My fingers, adept at handling steaming milk and delicate porcelain cups, were clumsy, stupid things on the keys. They wouldn't curve properly. They hit 2 notes at once. The simple scales in the book sounded like the tortured cries of a dying animal, but I persisted. The frustration was a clean, simple emotion. It wasn't the complex, gut-wrenching agony of betrayal. It was a problem I could solve with practice. I started waking up an hour earlier, before Christopher or Lily were awake. I would make a cup of tea, sit down at the keyboard, and practice. The house was filled with the halting, hesitant notes of Ode to Joy and Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. It was my sound, my noise, reclaiming the silence he had poisoned. One Saturday, about a month into my new routine, Lily came and sat beside me on the bench. "Play me a song, Mommy," she requested, her small body leaning against me. I launched into my shaky version of Mary Had a Little Lamb. It was slow, and I hit a few wrong notes, but when I finished, she clapped her hands with genuine delight. "That was beautiful, Mommy. You're a pianist." In that moment, surrounded by the evidence of my broken marriage, I felt a surge of pure, unadulterated joy. It was small, but it was mine. I was building something, however small, for myself and for my daughter. I wasn't just the woman who had been betrayed, I was a woman who was learning. The hollows were still there, but now I had notes to fill them with. Christopher, meanwhile, was unraveling. My cold indifference and my very visible, audible moving on were a punishment far worse than any screaming match. He tried to engage me in conversations about finances, about the future, but I would give him one-word answers. He bought me flowers, I left them to wilt in the vase. He was a ghost in his own home, and I was the living, breathing, red-haired reminder that he had killed us. The moment of true, unexpected turning, however, happened not at home, but in the outside world. It was a community cleanup day organized by the city. Lily's school had encouraged families to participate, and I'd signed us up weeks ago, before the implosion. I almost backed out, but the thought of spending a Saturday morning trapped in the house with Christopher's oppressive guilt was worse. So, on a bright, crisp morning that smelled of autumn leaves, Lily and I found ourselves in a local park, wearing plastic gloves and carrying trash bags. Christopher had opted to stay home, a decision for which I was silently grateful. Lily ran ahead, chasing after a friend from her class, and I was left to my own devices, picking up litter along a creek bed. It was peaceful, in a strange way. The mindless task of cleaning, the fresh air, the simple satisfaction of making something better. I was focused on trying to extricate a plastic bag from a thorny bush when I heard a voice behind me. "Need a hand with that? Looks like it's putting up a fight." I turned. The man was tall, wearing a simple sweatshirt and jeans, his own trash bag in hand. He had kind eyes, the sort that crinkled at the corners, and an easy smile. He wasn't trying to be charming, he was just being helpful. "Thanks," I said, a little flustered. I wasn't used to interacting with men, especially not friendly, attractive ones. It felt like using a muscle I'd forgotten existed. He gently took the branch I was struggling with and held it back while I pulled the bag free. "There you go." "Thanks," I said again, feeling inept. "It's surprisingly tenacious." "Like most problems," he replied with a chuckle. "Easier to handle with two people." He nodded towards the growing pile of trash in my bag. "You've been busy. I'm Alex, by the way." "Amelia," I said. And then, for the first time in a long time, I volunteered information about myself without it being tied to my trauma. "My daughter's school is here. Figured we should do our part." "Good for you," he said warmly. "I live a few blocks over. They do this cleanup every year and I always mean to come. First time I've actually made it." He fell into step beside me as we continued along the creek. The conversation was easy, effortless. We talked about the neighborhood, the best place to get coffee. I, of course, had a strong opinion, the sudden chill in the air. He asked about Lily, and I found myself talking about her piano lessons, carefully editing out any mention of a husband. It was just a conversation, a normal human interaction, but for me, it was a revelation. I was Amelia, the barista, the mother, the woman with red hair who was volunteering at a park. I wasn't the victim. I wasn't the betrayed wife. For 10 minutes, I was just a person, talking to another person. We reached a point where the path forked. "Well, my section's that way," Alex said, pointing. "It was really nice talking to you, Amelia." "You too, Alex," I said, and I meant it. He smiled again, a genuine, warm smile. "Maybe I'll see you at the next cleanup." "Maybe," I said, and watched him walk away. A strange feeling settled over me, a mixture of lightness and nervousness. It was the feeling of a door cracking open, just a sliver, letting in a beam of light into a room I thought would be dark forever. When Lily and I got back into the car later, my hands were dirty and I smelled of fresh air. I felt good. I had done something positive. I had had a pleasant conversation. The hollow inside me felt a little less empty. That night, when I sat down at my keyboard, the notes came more easily. My fingers felt less clumsy. I played a simple C major scale, up and down, and for the first time, it didn't sound like a struggle. It sounded like a beginning. The shattering was behind me. Now, I was learning how to listen for the music in the broken pieces. The cleanup day had left a residue, but not the kind you could wash off with soap. It was a fine, almost invisible dust of possibility that settled over everything, making the familiar contours of my life look just a little bit different. For days after, I found myself replaying the conversation with Alex in my head. It was so mundane, so ordinary, talk of coffee and weather and community service. And yet, it felt like the most significant interaction I'd had in years. It was a conversation that had nothing to do with survival, with grief, with the meticulous management of a disaster. It was just two people talking. This simple fact was both thrilling and terrifying. The thrill was a faint, almost forgotten sensation, like a muscle twitching back to life after a long paralysis. The terror was a cold, sharp needle of guilt. Was I allowed to feel this? To enjoy the memory of a strange man's smile while the ashes of my marriage were still warm? The guilt would quickly morph into a defensive anger. Allowed? Christopher hadn't asked for permission. He'd taken what he wanted and hidden it in a digital vault behind a heart emoji. Why was I policing my own thoughts? This internal debate became the background noise to my days. At work, I'd find myself staring out the window, steam wand in hand, wondering if Alex would ever come in for coffee. I'd mentally calculate the probability. He lived a few blocks over. He knew I was a barista. It wasn't an impossible notion. But then I'd picture it, him walking in, the bell jingling, his eyes finding me behind the counter. Would I smile? Would my voice catch? Would Christopher's ghost be standing between us, a silent, accusing specter? I never mentioned him to anyone, not even to Chloe, who would have dissected the encounter with the fervor of a romance novelist. This tiny secret was mine alone, a fragile, budding thing I kept hidden away from the harsh light of reality and the toxic soil of my current life. It was a fantasy, yes, but a necessary one. It was a proof of concept that a world existed beyond the confines of my pain. My piano practice became the anchor in this emotional turbulence. The keyboard was my confessional. My frustration, my confusion, my flickers of hope, I poured them all into the clumsy movements of my fingers. I was no longer just learning scales. I was trying to learn a simple piece, a beginner's version of a classical melody called Für Elise. The left-hand bass notes were a steady, predictable anchor, a rhythmic heartbeat. The right-hand melody was more elusive, a delicate dance of notes that required a touch I hadn't yet mastered. I'd practice for hours, the repetitive notes echoing through the empty house. Christopher was making himself scarce, which suited me perfectly. He'd taken to working even later, or so he claimed. I didn't care enough to verify. The sound of my piano was me reclaiming the audio landscape of my home, note by tentative note. One evening, after a particularly grueling session where my fingers just wouldn't cooperate with the second theme of Für Elise, I felt a wave of frustration so intense I almost slammed the keyboard lid shut. I was stuck. In everything. Stuck in this house, stuck in this limbo between marriage and divorce, stuck in this piece of music. I needed to get out, to breathe air that wasn't thick with the residue of my failed marriage. On impulse, I drove to a large bookstore on the other side of town, a place I hadn't visited in years. The moment I walked in, the smell of paper and ink was a balm. I wandered the aisles, my fingers trailing over book spines, losing myself in the quiet hum of other people's imaginations. I found myself in the music section, and my eyes landed on a book, The Emotional Language of Music. I pulled it off the shelf and flipped through it. It talked about how melodies could convey feelings words couldn't, how rhythm mimicked the human heart. It was exactly what I needed. I took it to a quiet corner where a few armchairs were arranged around a small coffee table. I sank into one, already engrossed in the introduction. For a blissful hour, I was nowhere. I was just a mind absorbing ideas about art and emotion. And then I heard a voice. A familiar, warm baritone. "Amelia?" I looked up, my heart performing a sudden, violent somersault against my ribs. It was Alex. He was holding a couple of books on architecture, looking as surprised as I felt. "Alex," I said, my voice coming out a little too high. I quickly closed my book, as if caught reading something illicit. "Hi, small world," he said, a genuine smile spreading across his face. "I thought that was you. The hair is hard to miss." He gestured to the empty chair opposite me. "Mind if I?" "No, not at all," I said, my mind racing. This wasn't the controlled environment of the coffee shop I'd imagined. This was random. This felt like fate. The thought made me dizzy. He sat down, placing his books on the table. "So, a reader and a community activist? Quite the Renaissance woman." I laughed, a nervous, fluttering sound. "Hardly, just trying to expand my horizons a bit." I nodded towards his books. "Architect? Close. Structural engineer," he said. "I like to see how other people solve problems. Plus, I find the drawings calming." He looked at the book in my hands. The Emotional Language of Music. That sounds deep. I felt a blush creep up my neck. "I'm learning to play the piano. I thought it might help me understand why I'm so terrible at it." He laughed, a rich, easy sound that seemed to soak into the very fabric of the armchair. I doubt you're terrible. It's a brave thing to do, learning an instrument as an adult. Most people are too set in their ways. The conversation flowed as easily as it had in the park, but this was different. We were indoors, in a more intimate setting. The topics drifted from books to our favorite cities, from why we loved Colorado to our most embarrassing childhood memories. I found myself talking about growing up here, about my parents, about how I'd fallen into being a barista almost by accident, but had grown to love the ritual of it. I carefully constructed my sentences, building a version of my life that was true but incomplete. A life that featured a daughter, a job, a passion for piano, but no husband. The omission felt like a lie of omission, and a weight settled in my stomach, but I couldn't bring myself to shatter the easy camaraderie with the sledgehammer of my reality. He was a great listener. He remembered things. He asked about Lily, about how her school year was going. He told me about his niece, whom he adored. He wasn't just waiting for his turn to talk, he was genuinely engaged. It was intoxicating. Then he glanced at his watch and sighed. "I'm sorry, I have to run. I'm meeting a colleague for dinner." He stood up, and a pang of disappointment, sharp and acute, shot through me. "Oh, of course," I said, trying to sound casual. "It was really great running into you again, Amelia," he said, his eyes holding mine for a moment too long. There was a question in them, an invitation. "You too, Alex." He hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. It was simple, elegant. Alex Carter, structural engineer, with a phone number and email. "I know this is probably forward, but I'd love to continue this conversation sometime. Over coffee, maybe. No pressure at all." My hand trembled slightly as I took it. The card felt heavy, significant. This was no longer a chance encounter. This was a choice. I looked at the card, then back at his face. His expression was open, hopeful, and completely without the guile I had become so accustomed to seeing in Christopher's eyes. I made a decision. A reckless, terrifying, exhilarating decision. "I'd like that," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. His smile could have powered the entire city. "Great, I'll text you," I nodded. "Okay." He gave a little wave and walked away, disappearing between the bookshelves. I sat back down, my legs feeling like jelly. I stared at the business card in my hand, Alex Carter. The letters seemed to pulse with potential. I had just accepted a date, a coffee date. It felt like jumping off a cliff. The guilt came rushing back, a cold tide. "You're still married, you haven't even filed the papers yet." But a stronger voice, the voice of the woman with red hair, countered, "I am emotionally widowed. I am allowed to have a conversation. I am allowed to feel seen." When I got home, the house was dark and silent. Christopher had left a note on the counter, "Had to work late. There's leftover pasta in the fridge." I crumpled the note and threw it away. I went to my keyboard. My heart was still pounding from the encounter. I sat down, placed my fingers on the keys, and without looking at the sheet music, I began to play the section of Für Elise that had been giving me so much trouble. And something miraculous happened. My fingers found the notes. They flowed, not perfectly, but with a newfound fluidity and emotion. The melody was no longer just a sequence of sounds, it was a question, a longing, a delicate thread of hope. I played it through to the end, and when the last note faded into the silence of the house, I realized I was crying. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of release. The echo of my old life was still there, but I had finally found a note of my own to play against it. And for the first time, I believed that the new melody might be more beautiful. The week between receiving Alex's card and our planned coffee date was a masterclass in emotional whiplash. The business card, a simple rectangle of matte cardstock, became a talisman. I kept it tucked in the back of my phone case, a secret against my skin. I'd take it out a dozen times a day, tracing the embossed letters of his name with my fingertip, my stomach performing a nervous, giddy flip each time. Then, the guilt would swoop in, a predatory bird, and the flip would turn into a nauseating lurch. I was a married woman arranging a date with another man. The fact that my marriage was a hollowed-out shell, a legal fiction propped up by divorce papers my lawyer had just begun drafting, didn't seem to matter to the part of my brain still wired for monogamy. I'd look at Christopher across the dinner table, at the way he carefully cut Lily's meat, and feel a wave of such profound self-loathing I could barely swallow. But then I'd remember the heart emoji. I'd remember the phrase, "It's killing me." Every day with her feels like a performance. And the self-loathing would harden into a sharp, defensive resolve. He had forfeited his right to my fidelity, to my guilt. This wasn't about revenge. This was about survival. This was about reminding myself that I, Amelia, could be seen as something other than a victim or a roommate. The morning of the coffee date, I was a tornado of nervous energy. I opened at the shop, my hands shaking as I set up the grinders and prepped the pastries. I'd chosen a neutral location, a small, independent coffee house a few towns over, a place where the chance of running into anyone we knew was virtually zero. It felt both safe and clandestine, which only amplified the sense of illicit adventure. I'd spent an absurd amount of time choosing my outfit, finally settling on dark jeans, a simple cashmere sweater, and boots. I wanted to look nice, but not like I was trying too hard. My red hair, now a familiar part of my identity, felt like my armor. I applied a little more mascara than usual, my hand trembling as I did it. "It's just coffee," I told my reflection. "It's just a conversation." He was already there when I arrived, 5 minutes early. He'd secured a small table in the corner, near a window that looked out onto a quiet street. He stood up as I approached, a simple, old-fashioned gesture that sent a flutter through my chest. "Amelia," he said, his smile warm and genuine, "you made it." "I made it," I echoed, sliding into the chair opposite him. The air between us was charged with a pleasant, nervous energy. We ordered our coffee, a black coffee for him, a flat white for me. The first few minutes were a delicate dance of small talk, the same kind we'd had in the park and the bookstore. But then he leaned forward slightly, his kind eyes intent on mine. "So," he began, his tone gentle but direct, "the last 2 times I've run into you, you've been alone. I have to ask, is there someone in your life?" The question hung in the air. This was it, the moment of truth. I could lie, I could obfuscate, I could give a vague, non-committal answer. But looking at him, at the open honesty in his face, I knew I couldn't. If this was going to be anything, it had to start with the truth, no matter how messy. I took a deep breath, my fingers tightening around the warm ceramic of my cup. "That's a complicated question," I started, my voice low. "The short, messy answer is yes and no." I met his gaze. "I'm separated. My husband, there was an affair, a long-term one. We're living in the same house for now, for our daughter's sake, but it's over. The papers are being drawn up." I braced myself for the look, the pity, the hesitation, the instant retreat, but it didn't come. Instead, his expression softened with understanding. "I'm sorry," he said, and it didn't sound like a platitude. It sounded like he genuinely was. That's a lot to be carrying around. The relief that washed over me was so potent it felt like a physical unclenching. "It is," I admitted, the words feeling like a confession. "Some days it feels like I'm carrying the whole world. Other days, it's a little lighter." "And the piano?" he asked, effortlessly shifting the focus back to me, to my rebuilding, not my destruction. I smiled, a real, unforced smile. "It's frustrating and wonderful. I'm still butchering Feur Elise, but I can almost get through the first page without wanting to throw the keyboard out the window." He laughed. "That's the spirit. My sister is a music teacher. She says the best students are the ones who get mad at the instrument. It means they care." We talked for over an hour. The conversation deepened, moving beyond the safe surface. I told him about the shock of discovery at the family barbecue, about the dramatic haircut that had felt like a rebirth. I didn't paint myself as a saint. I told him about the coldness I wielded against Christopher, the calculated indifference that was my only weapon. He listened, truly listened, his focus never wavering. He didn't try to fix it. He just let me talk, and he shared parts of himself, too. A previous long-term relationship that had ended amicably when they both realized they wanted different things. His love for building things, not just skyscrapers, but intricate model ships. His quiet, steadfast life. He was a man who seemed comfortable in his own skin, a quality I found incredibly attractive. At one point, I was telling a story about a difficult customer at the coffee shop, and I gestured with my hands, laughing. My wedding band, which I still wore out of a confused sense of habit, and for Lily's benefit, caught the light. I saw his eyes flicker to it for a split second, then back to my face. There was no judgment in his gaze, only a quiet acknowledgement of my complicated reality. But in that moment, I made another decision. When I got home, I would take the ring off. It was time. As we finally stood to leave, the afternoon light slanting long through the window, I felt a pang of disappointment that it was over. "This was really nice, Amelia," Alex said as we stepped out onto the sidewalk. The autumn air was crisp. I'd like to do it again, if you would." "I'd like that too," I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. He didn't try to kiss me. He didn't even try to hug me. He just reached out and gently squeezed my hand, a gesture of solidarity and promise that felt more intimate than any kiss could have at that moment. "I'll call you." I watched him walk away, and instead of the guilt, I felt a soaring, expansive hope. I drove home feeling lighter than I had in years. The house felt different when I walked in. It was just a house, a place I lived. It wasn't a shrine to my failed marriage anymore. I went straight to my bedroom, to the jewelry box on my dresser. I opened it and looked at the diamond ring and platinum band that had symbolized a promise that was now broken. I slowly, deliberately slid the rings off my finger. The skin beneath was pale and bore a faint indent. It felt naked, exposed, but also free. I placed the rings in the box and closed the lid with a soft, final click. That night, when Christopher came home, he noticed immediately. His eyes went to my left hand, now bare, and the color drained from his face. He looked like I'd physically struck him. He opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. He just stared at the empty space on my finger, the reality of his actions finally, viscerally, landing. I didn't say a word. I just turned and walked away, towards the living room, towards my keyboard. I had a new piece I wanted to start learning. The first cup of coffee had been poured, and for the first time, I was truly tasting it. Taking off the wedding ring was the final, tangible crack in the dam. What followed wasn't a flood, but a steady, irreversible change in the current of my life. The silence in the house was no longer a standoff. It was an acknowledgement of a new reality. Christopher saw the bare skin on my finger, and something in him broke. The pleading stopped. The guilty, shuffling attempts at conversation ceased. He became a ghost, a quiet tenant in the home we once shared, his presence reduced to the sound of a door closing or the shower running at odd hours. It was a relief, this quiet surrender. It gave me space to breathe. My coffee date with Alex became a second one, and then a third. We kept them simple, casual walks in the park, visits to art galleries. We were building a foundation, piece by careful piece. It was terrifying and exhilarating. Every text message exchange felt like a secret adventure. Every time I saw his name light up my phone, a jolt of pure, undiluted happiness would shoot through me. It was a feeling I had forgotten I was capable of. He was a man of his word, a great listener. He remembered the small details. He asked about my progress with Fouer Elise. He remembered that Lily had a science fair project coming up about volcanoes. When I mentioned, offhandedly, that the old wooden spice rack in my kitchen had finally fallen apart, he didn't just offer sympathy. "I could help you with that," he said during one of our walks, his breath misting in the crisp autumn air. "Building things is kind of my thing. We could build a new one together." The offer was so simple, so genuine. It wasn't a grand romantic gesture. It was practical, helpful. It felt like the most romantic thing in the world. "I'd like that," I said, my heart swelling. "But I should warn you, I'm notoriously bad at following instructions." He grinned. "The best projects are the ones that don't go according to plan. That's where the character comes in." We decided to make a day of it. A Saturday when Lily was at a friend's birthday party. Christopher, I knew, would be out. He'd started spending most weekends working or, I suspected, hiding from the crushing weight of my indifference. The house would be ours. The morning of, I was a bundle of nerves again, but this time it was mixed with a giddy, domestic excitement. I cleaned the kitchen, not out of obligation, but in anticipation. I wanted the space to be ready for our project. When the doorbell rang, my stomach did its now familiar flip. He stood on the porch, holding a bag from a hardware store and a small toolbox. He was wearing a worn-in flannel shirt and jeans, and he looked so solid, so real. "Ready to build a spice rack?" he asked, his eyes crinkling. "Ready as I'll ever be," I laughed, letting him in. We spread the pieces of wood, the small packets of screws, and the comically large, poorly folded instruction sheet on the kitchen floor. Just as he'd predicted, it was a disaster from the start. The diagrams were confusing, the parts were poorly labeled, and we spent a good 10 minutes trying to figure out which piece was bracket A and which was support D. We were on our knees, surrounded by the chaos, and instead of frustration, we were consumed by laughter. I held two pieces together backward while he tried to screw them in, only for the whole thing to collapse. He mockingly scolded me for my structural integrity violations, and I retorted that his engineering degree was clearly overrated. "It's the instructions," he insisted, holding up the crumpled paper. "This is a crime against clarity." "Excuses, excuses," I teased, nudging him with my shoulder. The physical contact, though brief and playful, sent a spark through me. The air in the kitchen, once a place of silent, tense meals, was now filled with the sound of our laughter, the whir of the screwdriver, and the easy rhythm of our banter. It felt like we were exorcising ghosts, filling the empty spaces with new, happy noise. At one point, our hands reached for the same screw at the same time. Our fingers brushed, and we both fell silent. The laughter faded, replaced by a sudden, charged intensity. He didn't pull away. His eyes met mine, and the world narrowed to the few inches of space between us. I could see the gold flecks in his brown eyes, the slight stubble on his jaw. The scent of sawdust and his clean, soapy smell filled my senses. "Amelia," he said, his voice soft. It was a question, and my answer was to lean in. The kiss was not frantic or desperate. It was slow and tender and profound. It was a first kiss that felt like a homecoming. His hand came up to cradle my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek, and every cell in my body, which had been frozen for so long, thawed and sang. It was a kiss that held all the unspoken words, all the shared laughter, all the quiet understanding we had built over cups of coffee and walks in the park. It was a promise. When we finally pulled apart, we were both breathless. The half-built spice rack lay forgotten between us. "Well," he said, a slow, dazed smile spreading across his face. "That was better than the instructions." I laughed, a watery, emotional sound, and rested my forehead against his. "Much better." We never did finish the spice rack that day. We left the pieces scattered on the floor, a beautiful, chaotic monument to the moment everything changed. We sat on the kitchen floor, our backs against the cabinets, talking and kissing, until the light outside began to fade and we knew we had to face the world again. When he left, the house didn't feel empty. It felt charged with the memory of his presence. I looked at the mess on the floor, at the ludicrously complicated instructions, and I felt a joy so deep it was almost painful. That night, Christopher came home. He walked into the kitchen and stopped, staring at the pile of wood and tools. His eyes, hollow and tired, took in the scene, the evidence of a life being lived, of joy being built without him. He looked from the mess to my face. I knew he could see it. The change, the light in my eyes that hadn't been there for months, the subtle smile I couldn't quite suppress. He saw the unspoken blueprint of my new happiness laid bare on the kitchen floor. He didn't say a word. He just turned and walked away, his shoulders slumped in a final, definitive defeat. The ghost had seen that the house was no longer haunted. I picked up a piece of the unfinished wood, running my fingers over its smooth grain. It was raw, imperfect, and full of potential. Just like me, just like this new, terrifying, wonderful life I was building. The first kiss was the seal on our contract. Now we had to build the rest. The kiss in the kitchen became a new kind of blueprint, one for my heart. It was as if Alex had gently installed a scaffold around the shattered remains of me, not to hide the damage, but to provide the support needed for a real, lasting repair. The world looked different through this new structure, brighter, more defined, full of possibilities instead of perils. Our relationship moved out of the secret, stolen moments, and began to weave itself into the fabric of my daily life. It was terrifying and exhilarating. We graduated from coffee dates to proper dinners. I learned that he was deathly allergic to shellfish and that he had a seemingly endless repository of terrible puns. He learned that I needed exactly 10 minutes of silence with my coffee in the morning to function like a human being, and that I cried at every movie, even the bad ones. We were learning the mundane, magnificent map of each other. But a shadow remained, long and persistent: Christopher. The legal machinery of divorce was grinding slowly, a tedious process of paperwork and mediation. We were civil, a term that perfectly described the frozen tundra of our interactions. He had moved out of the guest room and into the finished basement, a final retreat that symbolized our complete separation. We communicated through terse notes on the fridge and a shared digital calendar for Lily's schedule. One Wednesday evening, the tension snapped. Lily was at a sleepover. The house was oppressively quiet. I was in the living room, practicing a new, more complex piece on the keyboard, a melancholic but beautiful piece by Uruma. The notes were flowing, my fingers finding a confidence they'd never possessed before. I was lost in the music, a temporary escape. Christopher came up from the basement. He stood in the doorway, watching me for a long moment. I could feel his gaze but refused to acknowledge it. When the piece ended, I let my hands rest on the keys, the final note hanging in the air. "You're getting good," he said, his voice rough from disuse. I didn't turn around. "Thank you." He took a few steps into the room. I could smell the faint scent of his cologne, the one he'd started wearing during the affair. It triggered a nausea that had nothing to do with smell and everything to do with memory. "I saw you," he said, his tone flat. "Last weekend, getting into a car with him, that guy." My spine went rigid. So he had been watching. A part of me had known this moment would come. I finally turned to face him. The anger I saw in his eyes was a weak, pathetic thing, fueled by jealousy and a profound sense of entitlement. "And?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "And?" he repeated, a bitter laugh escaping him. "Amelia, we're not even divorced yet. What, you couldn't wait? You're just going to parade some random guy around?" The hypocrisy was so staggering it stole my breath for a second. The scaffolding around my heart held firm. "Parade him?" I said, standing up. "You think this is about parading someone? You think this is a competition? Christopher, you checked out of this marriage a long time before I ever took off my ring. You don't get to be jealous. You don't get to be angry. You forfeited those rights when you decided to have a long-term affair with your ex-girlfriend." "It was a mistake," he shouted, the veneer of civility cracking. "I told you," I ended it. "I'm trying to fix this. You can't fix it." My own voice rose to meet his, not in a scream, but in a sharp, clear declaration. "It's broken, you broke it. This isn't a software bug you can patch, Christopher. This is a human being. This is my life. You don't get to roll back to a previous save point because you don't like the outcome of your choices." He flinched as if I'd struck him. "So that's it. You're just going to replace me. With some construction worker?" "He's a structural engineer," I corrected, my tone icy. "And he's kind. And he listens. And he looks at me like I'm the only person in the room. Something you haven't done in years." The truth of my words landed between us, heavy and final. The fight went out of him. His shoulders slumped, and he looked old, defeated. He was finally understanding that no amount of begging, no outburst of jealousy, could change the fundamental truth. I had moved on. "I lost you," he whispered, more to himself than to me. "Yes," I said simply. There was no malice in it, it was just a fact. "You did." He nodded slowly, turned, and walked back down to the basement. The door closed with a soft, definitive click. It was the last real conversation we ever had as anything resembling a couple. The last gasp of our dying marriage. The next day, I saw Alex. I didn't tell him about the confrontation immediately. We were at his apartment for the first time, a clean, modern space filled with books, model ships, and a stunning view of the city. It was so inherently him. He made us dinner, a simple pasta dish, and we ate at his small dining table. But I was quiet, the emotional hangover from the fight with Christopher weighing on me. "Hey," Alex said, reaching across the table and taking my hand. "You're a million miles away. Everything okay?" So I told him. I told him about Christopher seeing us, about the argument, about the ugly, raw jealousy. I expected to see worry or perhaps possessiveness in his eyes. Instead, he just listened, his thumb stroking the back of my hand. When I finished, he was silent for a moment. "That must have been really hard," he said finally. "For both of you." His empathy, even for Christopher, stunned me. "You're not upset." "Why would I be upset?" he asked gently. "He's losing something incredible. Of course he's angry. Of course he's hurting. It doesn't excuse what he did, but it makes sense. My only concern is you. Are you okay?" Tears welled in my eyes, but they were tears of relief. He wasn't threatened. He wasn't angry. He was concerned for me. In that moment, the last of the scaffolding around my heart solidified into something permanent, something unshakable. This was what it felt like to be with someone who was secure, who was emotionally mature, who saw the whole, complicated picture and wasn't afraid of it. "I am now," I whispered. Later that evening, as we were washing the dishes together, he nodded towards the corner of the living room. There, on a workbench, sat the pieces of our infamous spice rack, now sanded smooth and partially assembled. "I've been working on it," he said, a little sheepishly. "I wanted to finish it for you, properly this time." I looked at the careful joints, the smooth finish. He was building it with patience and care, the way he was building a space for himself in my life. Not with grand, dramatic gestures, but with steady, reliable presence. The scaffolding wasn't just holding me up anymore, it was becoming part of the new structure. A structure that felt, for the first time, truly sound. The idea of Lily meeting Alex had been a low-grade hum of anxiety in the back of my mind for weeks. It was the final frontier, the most vulnerable bridge to cross. My daughter was the one pure, unspoiled part of my old life, and the thought of introducing a new variable, a new man, into her world filled me with a terror that rivaled the day I discovered the affair. What if she hated him? What if she felt betrayed? What if this, the one good thing I had managed to build from the rubble, somehow hurt her? I had talked about Alex to her in careful, casual terms for a while. Mommy's friend. She knew his name. She knew he liked to build things and that he made me laugh. She'd seen the finished spice rack, now proudly holding our jars of oregano and paprika, and I'd told her he helped me with it. She just nodded, her 8-year-old mind more interested in the new rack's functionality than its symbolism. But the time had come. The divorce proceedings were advancing, and Christopher was dating, too, a fact Lily had mentioned with a confusing mix of nonchalance and confusion. The world was changing for her, and I needed to show her that change could be safe and even good. We decided on a neutral, low-pressure activity, a Saturday afternoon at the local science museum. It was a place Lily adored, an environment full of distractions where the focus wouldn't be solely on the social dynamics. The morning of, I was a nervous wreck. I dressed Lily in her favorite dinosaur t-shirt, my hands fumbling with the buttons. "Are you excited to see the dinosaur skeletons, sweetie?" I asked, my voice a little too bright. "Yeah," she said, then looked at me with her large, perceptive eyes. "Is your friend Alex going to be there?" The directness of the question caught me off guard. "Yes, honey, he is. Is that okay?" She shrugged, a miniature masterpiece of childhood ambivalence. "I guess. Does he like dinosaurs?" "I don't know," I said, kneeling down to her level. "You can ask him. He's really nice, and he's very excited to meet you." She considered this, then nodded, seemingly satisfied for the moment. When we pulled into the museum parking lot, I saw him standing near the entrance, exactly on time. He saw my car and gave a small, warm wave. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. He was perfect. He didn't rush over. He didn't try to swoop in with a grand gesture. He waited for us to approach, his hands in his pockets, his smile gentle and unassuming. "Hey," he said to me, his eyes briefly meeting mine, offering a silent pillar of support. Then he crouched down, bringing himself to Lily's eye level. "You must be Lily. I'm Alex. It's really nice to meet you. I love your shirt. Is that a T-Rex?" Lily, suddenly shy, hid behind my leg, peeking out at him. She nodded. "He's my favorite," Alex said, still in his crouched position. "You know, they think the T-Rex had such tiny arms that it couldn't even scratch its own nose. How annoying would that be?" A tiny giggle escaped from behind my leg. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. "He couldn't?" she asked, her voice muffled by my jeans. "Nope, totally helpless if it had an itch. It's their greatest weakness." He stood up slowly and winked at me. "Shall we go see some skeletons?" The ice was broken. The next 2 hours were a masterclass in patience and genuine interest. Alex didn't try to impress her, he simply engaged with her on her level. When she dragged us to the fossil dig site, he got down on his knees in the sand beside her and helped her brush away the grit from a plastic dinosaur bone with the focus of a seasoned archaeologist. "What do you think this one is?" he asked her seriously. "Triceratops," she declared with authority. "Ah, of course. The horns gave it away. You're a real expert." He asked her questions about what she was learning in school, he listened to her long, convoluted story about a cartoon she liked, and he never once looked at his phone or seemed distracted. He was fully, completely present, with me and with her. The pivotal moment came in the physics exhibit, a room full of levers, pulleys, and ball runs. There was a complicated contraption where you could build your own ball track using different pieces. Lily was immediately drawn to it, but was quickly frustrated when her balls kept falling off the tracks. It's not working, she huffed, her little brow furrowed in concentration. Here, let's see, Alex said, studying the structure. I think the problem is the foundation. See this support here? It's a little wobbly. In my job, we have to make sure the foundation is super strong before we build anything tall, or the whole thing will fall down. He showed her how to reinforce the base, his large, capable hands moving with a precise gentleness. Together, they redesigned the track. He didn't take over, he guided. What if we put this curved piece here? Where should the tunnel go? Lily, her frustration forgotten, was completely absorbed, her small hands placing pieces under his direction. When they finally completed it, a complex, towering structure, they placed the ball at the top together. We all watched, holding our breath, as the ball zipped and zoomed through their creation, spiraling down tunnels and flying off ramps until it landed with a satisfying clunk in the final bucket. Lily erupted in a cheer. We did it! We built the best one! She turned, and without a moment's hesitation, threw her arms around Alex's legs in a spontaneous hug. The world stopped. I saw the look on his face, pure, unadulterated surprise, which quickly melted into a profound, tender joy. He carefully placed a hand on her back, returning the hug gently. We sure did, kiddo. That was an amazing design. In that moment, watching my daughter trust this man, watching this good man receive that trust with the reverence it deserved, something settled deep inside me. A fear I hadn't even fully acknowledged dissolved. This wasn't a threat to her world, it was an addition, a strengthening of the foundation. On the drive home, Lily was chatterbox, recounting every detail of their ball run triumph. Alex is really smart, Mommy. He knows how to build things so they don't fall down. Yes, he is, sweetie, I said, my eyes meeting his in the rearview mirror. His gaze was soft, full of a quiet happiness. That night, after I put Lily to bed, I found the little sketchbook she kept by her bed. On a new page, she had drawn a picture. It was a stick figure family, a tall man, a woman with red hair, and a small girl in a dinosaur shirt. They were standing in front of a museum, and above them she had written in her wobbly handwriting, "Me, Mommy, and Alex." I closed the book, my vision blurring with tears. The introduction was over. It had been a success. But more than that, it had been a transformation. We were no longer Mommy and Lily and Alex. In the eyes of my child, the most honest critic of all, we were becoming we. The new structure wasn't just sound. It was being furnished, filled with light, and called a home. The final divorce decree arrived in a thin, unforgiving manila envelope. I held it in my hands, expecting a seismic shift, a tidal wave of grief or vindication. But instead, there was just a quiet click. The sound of a door I had already walked through long ago, finally closing shut behind me. It was an administrative formality, a period at the end of a sentence I had already finished reading. I felt lighter, officially untethered from the anchor of Christopher's betrayal. The true milestone, the one that held real weight and emotion, was happening simultaneously. The move. The sale of the house had been swift, the profit split down the middle. It was more money than I'd ever had at once, a tangible seed for a new future. Christopher had already moved into a sterile-looking apartment complex on the other side of town. Our old home was just an empty shell, waiting for a new family to write its own story, hopefully a less tragic one. Now, I stood in the middle of a spacious, sunlit living room in a modern apartment building in the heart of Denver. Boxes were stacked like a cityscape around me, but the light was incredible. It poured through the large windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, each one a tiny prism of possibility. This was my space. Ours. Mine and Lily's. The door opened and Alex walked in, carrying a large box labeled Kitchen Fragile. He was sweating slightly, his t-shirt dusted with cardboard residue. Lily followed behind him, dragging a smaller box containing her most prized stuffed animals. "This is the last of the kitchen, I think," Alex said, setting the box down with a grunt. He looked around, his eyes scanning the high ceilings and the view of the city skyline. "It's really starting to look like a home." "It's empty," Lily stated, her voice echoing slightly in the bare space. "It's not empty, kiddo," Alex corrected gently, sweeping her up into his arms. It's full of potential, and it's full of us. That's all that matters. She giggled as he tickled her, the sound bouncing off the bare walls, already beginning to fill them with life. We spent the day unpacking. It was a chaotic, joyful, exhausting process. I unpacked my books, placing them on shelves we had assembled together the day before. Alex, with an engineer's precision, arranged the kitchenware in cupboards, creating a system of organization that was both efficient and strangely beautiful. Lily, tasked with unpacking her own room, would periodically run out to show us a forgotten treasure she'd rediscovered: a sparkly rock, a drawing, a mismatched sock. It was in the middle of this organized chaos that Alex brought in one last, flat-packed box. I recognized the brand. It was the same one as the ill-fated spice rack. I know, he said, seeing my raised eyebrow. But hear me out. This is a bookshelf, a big one, for all your books about the emotional language of music. And it's our first official piece of furniture for our new place. We have to build it together. With the comical instructions? I asked, a smile playing on my lips. The most comical, he confirmed, his eyes twinkling. So we cleared a space in the middle of the living room floor. Lily appointed herself as the supervisor and chief screw passer. We spread out the pieces and the dreaded instruction sheet. It was, as promised, a labyrinth of confusing diagrams and poorly translated warnings. But something was different this time. We were different. There was no underlying tension, no nervousness. We were a team. We bickered playfully about which way a bracket should face. I held pieces steady while he drilled. He patiently showed Lily how to use a screwdriver, guiding her small hands. We got steps wrong, had to backtrack, and laughed until our sides hurt when a section we'd just assembled collapsed in a heap. It wasn't about the bookshelf. It was about the process, the shared purpose, the act of creating something solid and functional and beautiful from a pile of separate, useless parts. It was the perfect metaphor for our new life. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the city, the bookshelf was finished. It stood tall and straight and sturdy against the wall. It wasn't perfect. A few screws were slightly crooked, and there was a small scratch on one side from our earlier collapse, but it was ours. We had built it. We sat on the floor, leaning against a stack of boxes, too tired to move. Lily was curled up against my side, half asleep. Alex had his arm around me, his fingers gently tracing patterns on my shoulder. I looked around. At the towers of boxes yet to be unpacked. At the new bookshelf, already holding a few of my favorite novels. At my daughter, safe and content. At the man beside me, whose steady presence had become the cornerstone of my happiness. The old house had been a beautiful lie, its foundation riddled with termites of deceit. This new apartment, with its blank walls and cardboard cities, held a different promise. Its foundation wasn't made of concrete and rebar, but of something far more resilient. Honesty, chosen love, and the memory of laughter shared over a poorly drawn instruction manual. It's a good bookshelf, I murmured, leaning my head against Alex's shoulder. It's the best bookshelf, he replied, kissing the top of my head. Lily stirred. I'm hungry. We ordered pizza and ate it sitting on the floor, using a cardboard box as a table. We were homeless, in a way, surrounded by the chaos of transition. But as I looked at the two of them in the soft evening light, their faces illuminated by the city stretching out below us, I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones. I was finally, undeniably home. The new foundation was poured, and it was solid. Life in the new apartment settled into a rhythm more beautiful than any piece of music I could ever hope to play. It was a symphony of mundane, magical moments. The sound of Alex's key in the lock after work. The smell of coffee brewing in our kitchen, not mine, ours. The sight of Lily's artwork, now held by magnets Alex had brought back from a business trip, adorning the refrigerator. It was a life built not on grand promises, but on 1,000 small, consistent acts of love. My piano playing had progressed from a halting struggle to a fluent passion. The keyboard was no longer a place of refuge, but a source of joy. I had moved on from Feur Elise to more complex pieces, my fingers finding a confidence that mirrored the one I now felt in my soul. I often played in the evenings, with the city lights twinkling outside our large windows, providing a spectacular, silent audience. Alex was my biggest fan. He would sit on the sofa with a book or simply watch me, a soft, contented smile on his face. He claimed my playing was the perfect soundtrack to our life. Lily, too, had started showing an interest. I would sit her next to me on the bench and guide her small fingers to play simple melodies. Our home was often filled with music, a stark and beautiful contrast to the oppressive silence of the old house. One evening, about a year after we had moved in, we were having a typical Friday night. We'd built a blanket fort in the living room, a sprawling, precarious structure that Lily had declared the coziest castle in the world. We were all inside it, surrounded by pillows and fairy lights, watching a silly animated movie. Lily was tucked between Alex and me, her head eventually drooping onto his shoulder as she fell asleep, a testament to the absolute safety she felt with him. When the movie credits rolled, he carefully extracted himself, laying her down gently on a pile of pillows. He gestured for me to follow him out of the fort. We stood in the soft glow of the fairy lights, looking at our sleeping daughter, her chest rising and falling in a peaceful rhythm. "She has a recital next week," I whispered, nodding towards the keyboard. "She's playing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. She's terrified." "She'll be amazing," he said, his voice full of unwavering certainty. He put his arm around me, pulling me close. We stood like that for a long moment, watching her sleep, the city humming its own lullaby beyond the windows. Then he turned to me. His expression was soft, but there was a new intensity in his eyes, a nervous energy I hadn't seen before. "Play something for me?" he asked. "Now, it's late. Please, that new piece you've been working on." "The one by Ainati?" I smiled, curious. He wasn't usually so insistent. I sat down at the keyboard, the blanket fort creating a whimsical backdrop. I placed my fingers on the keys and began to play I Giorni. It was a flowing, emotive piece, its simple melody capable of carrying profound feeling. I lost myself in it, as I always did, the notes telling a story of journey and arrival. When the last note faded, I turned on the bench to face him. He wasn't on the sofa anymore. He was down on one knee, right there on the living room floor in the shadow of our blanket fort castle. My breath caught in my throat. The world slowed, then stopped entirely. In his hand was a small, velvet box. Inside, nestled against the dark fabric, was a ring. It wasn't a large, flashy diamond, but a beautiful, unique stone, a deep blue sapphire, flanked by two small, brilliant diamonds. It was elegant, strong, and utterly perfect. "Amelia," he began, his voice thick with emotion, but steady. "From the moment I met you, covered in dirt by that creek, you took my breath away. Not just because you were beautiful, but because of the strength I saw in your eyes. The strength of a woman who was determined to rebuild her life from the ground up. I fell in love with you in a bookstore, talking about music and architecture. I knew I wanted to build a life with you on that kitchen floor, surrounded by the mess of a spice rack we couldn't figure out." A tear escaped and traced a warm path down my cheek. I couldn't speak. I could only listen, my heart pounding a frantic, joyful rhythm against my ribs. "I love our life," he continued, his eyes glistening in the fairy light. "I love coming home to you and Lily. I love the sound of your piano filling our home. You have built something so beautiful from the ashes, and the greatest privilege of my life has been to stand beside you while you did it. I don't want to just stand beside you anymore. I want to walk with you for the rest of my life." He took a deep breath. "Will you marry me?" The word was out of my mouth before the question had fully landed, a sob and a laugh and a promise all at once. "Yes, yes, Alex. 1,000 times yes." He slid the ring onto my finger. It fit perfectly. It felt like it had always belonged there. He stood up and pulled me into his arms, kissing me with a tenderness that held the weight of every shared laugh, every overcome obstacle, every quiet moment of understanding we had ever shared. From inside the blanket fort, a small, sleepy voice said, "What's going on?" We broke apart, laughing through our tears. Lily was sitting up, rubbing her eyes, looking from Alex's tear-streaked face to mine. Alex went over and scooped her up, carrying her back to me. "I asked your mom a very important question," he said, his voice wobbling with happiness. "Did you ask if we could get a dog?" she asked, hopeful. I laughed, holding out my hand so she could see the ring. "Even better, sweetie. He asked if we could be a family. Forever." Lily's eyes widened as she looked at the sparkling sapphire. Then she looked at Alex, then back at me. A huge smile spread across her face. "So, you're going to be my stepdad, for real?" "If that's okay with you," Alex said, his voice suddenly nervous, as if her approval was the most important vote of all. Lily thought about it for a dramatic second, then threw her arms around his neck. Yes, now can we get a dog? We all dissolved into laughter, a tangled, happy mess of three people, bound together by choice, by love, and by the melody of a perfect moment. The piece of my life that had been missing wasn't a person or a place. It was this certainty, this promise. The music had finally found its resolution, and the song was just beginning. The air in the small, sun-drenched botanical garden was thick with the scent of jasmine and blooming roses. A far cry from the sterile, air-conditioned church where I'd said my first vows. Back then, the promises had felt like a script, lines in a play I believed would have a happy ending. Today, every word was a stone I had chosen myself, laid with intention to build a fortress that would last a lifetime. I stood before a small gathering of our closest people. My sister, beaming. A few friends from the coffee shop, including Chloe, who was discreetly dabbing her eyes. Mr. Henderson, the music store owner, looking proudly avuncular. And Christopher, he had come at Lily's tearful insistence. He sat in the back row, his posture stiff, a living reminder of a path not taken. His presence no longer had the power to hurt me, it was simply a fact, a closed chapter. My eyes, however, were fixed on the man standing beneath the floral archway, waiting for me. Alex. He looked handsome and solid in a simple navy suit, his gaze so full of love and unwavering certainty that I felt my knees go weak. On his other side stood Lily, our 8-year-old efficient for the day, clutching a piece of paper with her carefully written lines, her face a mixture of grave importance and bubbling excitement. She wore a simple yellow dress, a splash of sunshine between us. This was our day, our way. There was no giving away. There was only me, walking toward my future, my hand in hand with my past, the living, breathing embodiment of my resilience. As I reached them, Lily stepped forward, her voice clear and bright, cutting through the quiet. "Welcome, everyone," she began, reading from her paper. "We are here today to celebrate love. Not a fairy tale love that just happens, but a real love, the kind you build, like a bookshelf." A ripple of knowing laughter went through our small audience. Alex and I exchanged a smile, our eyes misty. My mom is the strongest person I know, and Alex is the kindest. Together, they make our family cozy, like a blanket fort. She looked up at us, her duty done, and beamed. The efficient, a warm-faced woman we'd found who specialized in non-traditional ceremonies, took over. But the heart of the service was ours. We had written our own vows. Alex went first, his voice steady and deep, his eyes never leaving mine. "Amelia, I vow to always be your scaffold, to support your dreams, to steady you when you waver, and to always, always marvel at the incredible structure you are building of your life. I vow to be the calm in your storm and the laughter in your kitchen. I vow to love Lily as my own, with every beat of my heart. I give you my patience, my honesty, and my unwavering faith in us." Tears streamed down my face, but they were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. It was my turn. "Alex," I began, my voice trembling but clear. "I vow to bring my whole, repaired heart to you every day. I vow to keep learning the music of our life together, even the complicated parts. I vow to be your partner in every adventure, from building furniture to building a future. You saw the broken pieces of me, and you didn't look away. You helped me see that they could become a mosaic, more beautiful for having been broken. I give you my trust, my passion, and my forever." We exchanged the rings, simple platinum bands. As I slid his onto his finger, I saw the faint, permanent smudges of ink and graphite from his work, and I loved them. They were the marks of a man who built things that lasted. The efficient pronounced us partners for life. And as we kissed, a soft, sweet seal on our promises, the small crowd erupted in cheers. But the sound that truly marked the beginning of our marriage was the joyous, uninhibited shout from our daughter, who threw her arms around both of us, completing our circle. The reception was a joyful, informal affair at our favorite restaurant. There was speech from my sister, a surprisingly funny one from Chloe, and then Alex stood up, tapping his glass. He didn't talk about me, he talked to Lily. "Lilybug," he said, and she looked up, her eyes wide. "I know today is about me and your mom, but it's also about you. You are the bravest, coolest kid I know. And today, I want to make you a promise, too." He pulled out a small, wrapped box and handed it to her. Inside was a simple, silver necklace with a small, engraved pendant. On one side, it said always. On the other, it had 3 tiny engravings, a coffee cup, a piano key, and a dinosaur. "I promise to always be there," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "To help with your science projects, to listen to you practice piano, and to never, ever tell you that your T-Rex jokes aren't funny. I am so proud to be your stepdad." Lily launched herself into his arms, burying her face in his shoulder. It was the final thread, woven tightly into the tapestry of our new family. Later, as the sun dipped below the skyline, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, I sat at the small electric piano the restaurant had kindly let me use. The room fell quiet. I looked at Alex, at my daughter, at our friends. "This is for my husband," I said softly into the microphone, "and for our family." And I played. I played the complex, beautiful piece by Yuruma that I had struggled with for so long. But this time, it wasn't a struggle. It was a release. It was a celebration. The notes flowed from my fingers, telling a story of pain, of discovery, of resilience, and of a love that was chosen, built, and earned. It was the soundtrack of my upgrade. As the last note hung in the air, I looked up. Alex was watching me, his expression saying everything. There were no more what-ifs, no more ghosts. There was only the quiet, unshakable certainty of our shared tomorrow. The story of the betrayal was closed. The story of us was just on its first, beautiful page.